It was an ordinary Tuesday morning at the Washington National Zoo when the first screams pierced the October air, followed immediately by the urgent voice of Security Supervisor Marcus Johnson broadcasting over the emergency communication system that a large feline had escaped containment. The announcement sent waves of panic throughout the visitor areas as families scattered in all directions, children crying while clinging to their parents' hands, and armed guards with tranquilizer rifles rushed along concrete pathways like soldiers responding to a battlefield emergency. At the center of this chaos stood a 400-pound male lion with a golden mane flowing in the cold Washington, D.C. wind, walking with the natural majesty of a creature born to rule, having somehow accomplished what security experts had sworn was impossible by escaping from a maximum security enclosure at America's most modern zoological facility. The acrid smell of human fear mixed with the scent of autumn leaves as visitors fled along paved pathways, abandoning strollers, spilled popcorn, and dreams of a peaceful family outing behind them. Emergency sirens began wailing, while the 1st Metropolitan Police Patrol units could be heard approaching in the distance, their sirens mixing with screams of terror that echoed among the zoo's century-old trees. Simba, oblivious to the panic he was causing, walked with determination as his golden eyes surveyed the environment, not in search of prey or threats, but guided by something deeper and more primitive that transcended basic survival instincts, as if an invisible magnetic force was drawing him toward a specific destination. Henry Thompson, 73 years old, stood near the main entrance when he heard the first screams, a Vietnam War veteran who had retired 8 years earlier from his position as head animal keeper and had returned that morning for a nostalgic visit on the 20th anniversary of his retirement to see how his children were doing, as he used to call the animals he had raised. Wearing his favorite brown wool coat and leaning on an oak walking stick, Henry observed the chaos around him with the calm of someone who had faced far worse things on distant battlefields. Visitors ran toward him shouting warnings about a loose lion, but something made Henry remain exactly where he was, not out of bravery but recognition, because when he saw the golden silhouette emerge from among the trees and observed the movement pattern of those powerful paws and the specific angle of that majestic head, Henry's heart leaped not with fear, but with a much more complex emotion. His blue eyes, clouded by cataracts but still penetrating, widened in recognition as he whispered Simba's name, his voice breaking and being drowned out by the sound of sirens. The last visitor had run past him 30 seconds earlier, while security guards shouted through megaphones for him to move, hide, or run, but Henry Thompson remained motionless in the middle of the main pathway with trembling hands, not from fear, but from anticipation. In the distance, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the zoo's veterinary director, watched through binoculars with her heart racing, shouting over the radio for someone to get that elderly man out of there before he was killed. But Henry knew something that no one else there knew, something that time had buried under 2 decades of bureaucracy, new hires and modern protocols, something that only 2 creatures in that zoo still remembered. Simba continued his deliberate journey toward the main gate, completely ignoring the tranquilizer darts that buzzed dangerously close to his head, his eyes fixed on the white-haired man, who remained motionless like a statue amid the chaos, and with each step, something primitive in his memory became clearer as the scent guided him. Even after 20 years, even after decades of other smells, other humans, other routines, there was something about that particular man's scent that activated long-dormant neural circuits in the lion's brain, representing the scent of home, safety, and a father figure. Marcus Johnson, the security supervisor, stood 50 meters away with a tranquilizer gun shaking in his hands, shouting through a megaphone for Mr. Thompson to move away immediately as the animal approached. But Henry did not move, keeping his eyes fixed on the approaching lion while tears began rolling down his wrinkled cheeks. Not tears of fear, but of pure, uncontrollable emotion. When Simba was 10 meters away, something extraordinary happened. As the lion stopped completely, his breathing accelerated, and he tilted his head slightly, just as he had done as a cub when trying to understand a new command or interesting sound. Armed guards stood tense with fingers on triggers, waiting for any aggressive movement, while security cameras captured every second, and reporters who had arrived on scene pointed their phones and professional cameras, instinctively knowing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Simba took 3 more cautious steps, stopped again, and studied Henry's face with intensity, as if processing information at levels that defied scientific understanding of animal memory. And then, in a display that would make biologists question decades of research, the magnificent predator slowly lowered his head in a respectful gesture of submission. The silence that followed was deafening, with even the sirens seeming to fade, as if all of Washington, D.C. was holding its breath, while Dr. Mitchell watched through binoculars with her mouth open in amazement, murmuring that this was impossible, because lions do not retain emotional memories for 2 decades. However, Marcus Johnson, who had worked at the zoo for 15 years, was beginning to remember old stories whispered among senior employees about Henry Thompson, the legendary keeper who had raised an entire generation of big cats as if they were his own children. 20 years earlier, Henry Thompson was not just a keeper, but a living legend in the American zoo world, known throughout the country for his almost mystical ability to connect with big cats. And when Simba arrived at the National Zoo as a 6-week-old orphan rejected by his mother at a Detroit zoo, Henry volunteered to care for him 24 hours a day. For 8 months, Henry fed Simba with a bottle every 3 hours, slept on an improvised bed next to the cub's enclosure, played with him during the day, comforted him during nighttime storms, and gradually taught the young lion the social skills necessary to eventually integrate with other cats. Henry's colleagues thought he was exaggerating the emotional connection, while supervisors warned him about becoming too involved with the animals. But Henry knew something that science was just beginning to discover, that some bonds transcend species, time, and even death. Simba approached Henry with deliberate but cautious steps, and when he was 2 meters away, he stopped again and made a sound that none of those present had heard before. Not a roar or growl, but something lower and more intimate, almost like a giant purr. Henry slowly extended his right hand, the same hand that had fed Simba thousands of times 2 decades earlier, whispering that it was okay and that Daddy was there, while Simba sniffed Henry's hand for several long seconds, his nostrils widening to capture every nuance of a scent that had been engraved in his memory during the most formative months of his life. Then, in a scene that would make videos go viral within hours, the lion began gently licking Henry's hand, while tears ran freely down Henry's face as he carefully petted Simba's mane, murmuring that he knew he would remember and that he always knew he would, his sweet boy. Simba responded by resting his enormous head on Henry's chest, just as he had done as a cub seeking attention, with the 400-pound lion capable of breaking bones with a single bite, behaving like a huge house cat seeking affection from its owner. The guards watched in absolute silence, some crying openly while others could barely believe what they were seeing, as cameras captured every second of a reunion that defied everything they knew about animal behavior. Dr. Mitchell approached cautiously while maintaining a safe distance, and as a veterinarian with a doctorate in animal behavior, she knew she was witnessing something that contradicted decades of scientific research, asking Henry how this was possible since scientific literature stated that lions do not maintain specific emotional bonds for more than a few years. Henry smiled through tears while continuing to pet Simba, responding that there are things in this world that science cannot yet explain, and love is one of them. Simba lay down at Henry's feet, adopting a position that allowed the elderly man to lean against his enormous side, the same position they had adopted 20 years earlier when Henry read the newspaper while the cub slept beside him, explaining to fascinated observers that Simba used to do that when he was small, lying like that every afternoon after eating while Henry sometimes read about sports or politics because the lion liked his voice. As if responding to the comment, Simba again emitted that deep purr, a sound that vibrated in his enormous chest and warmed the hearts of everyone who heard it. Convincing Simba to return to his enclosure proved surprisingly easy, as when Henry stood up and began walking toward the lion habitat, Simba followed obediently like a giant dog following its owner, with Henry saying softly to go home, friend, and Simba responding with that comforting purr. The procession of Henry walking slowly with his cane, Simba at his side, and armed guards forming a respectful perimeter advanced through the zoo in almost reverential silence, while returning visitors who had been given the all-clear signal watched in amazement, taking photos and recording videos of a scene that seemed taken from a fantasy movie. When they reached the enclosure, Simba hesitated at the entrance, looking at Henry with an expression that could only be described as melancholic, as if understanding that this encounter was temporary, prompting Henry to whisper that he knew and didn't want it to end either. but that Simba now had his family there and his home was there. Simba licked Henry's hand one more time before walking slowly into the enclosure. Lying down near the fence, where he could still see Henry and remaining there, while guards checked and reinforced security systems. Within 6 hours, video of Henry and Simba's reunion had gone viral on all social media platforms, with hashtags becoming trending topics worldwide, while animal behavior experts from universities around the world watched the videos repeatedly, trying to understand how a lion had retained such specific emotional memories for 2 decades. The incident forced the National Zoo to completely review its security protocols after investigating how Simba had managed to escape from a high-security enclosure, with the investigation revealing a failure in the electronic locking system that engineers called a 1 in a million possibility. More important than security protocols was the change in policy regarding former employees, as the zoo created a special program allowing retired keepers like Henry to make regular visits to animals they raised, officially recognizing that some bonds are too important to ignore. Henry accepted monthly visits to Simba, always accompanied by security guards and under special protocols, but everyone at the zoo knew that if another incident occurred, Henry would be the first person they would call, while the University of Maryland initiated a long-term study on interspecies bonds using Henry and Simba as a case study. 2 years after what became known in zoo circles as the Simba incident, Henry continued his monthly visits with Simba, always recognizing him immediately and responding with that low, comforting purr, always lying in the same position that allowed Henry to lean against his side. The zoo installed a special plaque near the lion habitat, commemorating bonds that transcend species, time, and understanding, while educational programs developed around the story taught children about empathy, connection, and the importance of treating all living beings with dignity and respect. During one of his visits while watching Simba sleep peacefully under the afternoon sun, Henry reflected on the day that not only changed his life, but also global understanding of bonds between humans and animals, telling Dr. Mitchell that people always ask how it was possible for a lion to remember him after 20 years, explaining that they are asking the wrong question because the question is not how Simba remembered him, but how could they forget. That afternoon, as the sun set over Washington, D.C., painting the sky with golden tones that perfectly matched Simba's mane, it became clear that there are stories too big to be contained by scientific explanations, and sometimes the only explanation needed is love, which sometimes manifests in ways that stop time and change the world forever.